Crimson Hollow wasn't just another rundown district. It was a place where the line between the living and the dead blurred. Long abandoned by hope and swallowed by darkness, the Hollow had earned its reputation as a cursed place, a decaying scar on the city's edge. The streets, riddled with cracks and littered with broken glass, stretched out like veins, leading nowhere but deeper into despair. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of mildew, burning oil, and something more sinister, the lingering essence of fear. Crumbling buildings leaned precariously over narrow alleys, their facades shattered and windows shattered like jagged teeth. In the distance, the sun dipped below the horizon, bleeding a deep crimson hue across the sky, as though the district itself had opened a wound. As dusk fell, a dense, ghostly fog slithered through the streets, curling around street lamps that flickered weakly before extinguishing altogether. The fog wasn't natural. It carried whispers, soft and incoherent at first, but growing louder, more aggressive, as night deepened. Some swore they could hear names being called, promises of power or cries for help, but no one dared to follow the voices. Crimson Hollow was alive in the worst possible way. It was said that the ground beneath its streets had soaked in too much blood, and the souls of those who perished here never left. Locals from neighboring districts warned, once the fog rises, don't look back. If you hear your name, run. The district wasn't empty, though. It was ruled by shadows, both literal and figurative. At the center of this urban wasteland stood the Night Reapers, a gang so deeply entwined with the Hollow's curse that some believed they weren't fully human anymore. They moved like wraiths through the streets, their black cloaks blending into the fog, their faces often hidden by crude masks carved to resemble twisted skulls. They didn't just rob or extort, they terrorized. Their leader, Rex Donovan, known in whispered tones as the Hollow King, was a towering figure with cold, piercing eyes and a scar that ran from his temple down to his jaw. Rumor had it that the scar wasn't from a blade or bullet, but from something darker, some ancient force that had marked him when he made a pact with the Hollow itself. Rex wasn't just feared for his cruelty. He was believed to have control over the fog and shadows, bending them to his will. There were stories of people who'd stood up to the Night Reapers, only for the mist to swallow them whole, their screams echoing long after their bodies vanished. Whether these were ghost stories or truth didn't matter. Fear was power in Crimson Hollow, and Rex Donovan wielded it like a blade. One particular evening, as the fog thickened and the Hollow's heartbeat grew louder in the stillness, Rex stood atop a crumbling building overlooking the main square, a desolate place littered with rusted cars and skeletal remains of market stalls. His gang circled below, their dark forms barely visible through the rolling mist. "This city's heart still beats, boys," Rex growled, his voice deep and gravelly, echoing off the broken walls. He took a drag from a hand-rolled cigarette, the ember flickering like a lone star in the darkness. "But it beats for me." The Reapers howled in approval, their cheers blending with the hollow wails of the wind. Suddenly, a shift in the fog. A figure, a silhouette, strong and composed, walked through the mist undeterred by the oppressive air. His steps were deliberate, calm, as though the district's curse had no hold over him. Rex's eyes narrowed. "Who the hell is that?" One of the Reapers hesitated, squinting through the haze. "Looks like Mike Tyson." The name rippled through the gang like a sudden gust of cold wind. Even the fog seemed to recoil, swirling differently around Tyson's form, never quite touching him. Rex, however, scoffed, masking his unease with arrogance. "Boxer or not, no one walks through my hollow like that." But deep down, something twisted in Rex's gut, a primal warning. Crimson Hollow wasn't just a district of shadows and ghosts, it was a reflection of the fear within men's hearts. And as Tyson moved closer, his presence stirring the fog into unnatural shapes, Rex couldn't help but wonder, was this man just flesh and bone, or something more? The stage was set. Crimson Hollow, a cursed land of shadows, was about to witness a storm unlike any it had seen before. And for the first time in a long while, the Reapers felt something alien creeping up their spines. Fear. The fog in Crimson Hollow thickened, curling around the jagged ruins like skeletal fingers. Whispers echoed through the alleys. low murmurs that slithered through the mist, calling out to anyone foolish enough to walk these cursed streets after dark. But that night, as the hollow pulsed with its usual malevolence, something shifted. Through the creeping haze, a solitary figure appeared. His steps were deliberate, steady, each one echoing against the hollowed-out buildings. It was Mike Tyson, but not the man the world once knew from roaring arenas and blinding spotlights. This Tyson moved differently, his posture calm yet unshakably firm, his eyes sharp and calculating. Dressed in a dark hooded jacket and jeans, he carried no weapons. His fists, the same ones that once terrified opponents in the ring, now rested at his sides, relaxed, yet coiled like loaded springs. The hollow seemed to recognize him in a way that made the fog hesitate, as if uncertain whether to approach or retreat. The whispers that usually swelled around strangers dulled into a low hum. Shadows flickered in the corners of Tyson's vision, ghostly forms, watching, waiting, but he walked on, unfazed. He wasn't new to fear. He had lived it, faced it, and conquered it. Tyson's reputation had long been built on raw strength and ferocity, but now there was something more, a deeper calm, like a man who had wrestled with his own darkness and won. That made him dangerous, especially here, where the line between the living and the dead blurred. A sharp clang echoed through the alley as a rusted pipe fell from a fire escape, crashing mere inches from Tyson's feet. He didn't flinch. Instead, his head turned slightly, eyes narrowing at the swirling mist. From the shadows, three figures emerged, night reapers, their faces masked by crude bone-like carvings, each wielding rusted blades. "Look at this," one of them hissed, the blade glinting under the flickering street lamp. "The legend himself, walking right into the hollow like he owns it." The second reaper chuckled, his voice raspy, as though it had been dragged across gravel. "What's the matter, Tyson? Lost your way? Or maybe you're just stupid?" Tyson didn't respond. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, studying them, his hands still at his sides. The third reaper took a step forward, twirling a chain. "We're gonna make you scream, champ. The hollow feeds on fear, and tonight it's gonna feast." For a brief moment the fog thickened, swirling around the reapers, amplifying their menace. But Tyson remained still. Then, in a blink, he moved. His first punch was a blur, lightning fast and brutal. It connected with the first reaper's jaw, sending him flying into a decaying brick wall with a sickening thud. Before the second reaper could react, Tyson closed the distance, dodging the wild swing of a blade, and delivered a bone-crushing elbow to the man's ribs. A crack echoed through the alley, followed by the muffled groan of a man who knew he'd never stand straight again. The third reaper, eyes wide with panic, swung his chain wildly. Tyson ducked low, his movements fluid, and swept the reaper's legs from under him. As the man crashed to the ground, Tyson pressed a heavy boot onto his chest, pinning him. "Where's Rex Donovan?" Tyson's voice was low, but carried a weight that made the air feel heavier. The reaper gasped, trying to wriggle free. He's at the tower. The old watchtower, north end." Tyson's gaze didn't waver. He pressed harder on the man's chest, enough to make him wheeze. "Tell him I'm coming." Then, as suddenly as it had started, Tyson stepped off, allowing the battered reaper to scramble away into the mist, clutching his side. But the hollow wasn't finished testing him. A bone-chilling wind swept through the alley, carrying a chorus of whispers that grew louder, more insistent. The fog thickened again, and Tyson felt it. A pull, almost like icy hands wrapping around his ankles, trying to drag him down. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, centering himself, focusing on his breathing. This wasn't just about fists and strength anymore. The hollow wasn't a place of flesh and blood alone. It was a battlefield of the mind, a place where fear fed the shadows. Tyson had fought demons before, internal ones that clawed at his sanity during his darkest days. But this was different. This was the manifestation of those fears, given form and malice. But Tyson wasn't about to back down. He clenched his fists and moved forward, each step forcing the fog to part. The path to the watchtower, where Rex Donovan awaited, lay ahead. Tyson's pulse quickened, not out of fear, but anticipation. This wasn't just another fight. It was a reckoning. As he moved deeper into Crimson Hollow, the whispers swirled again, this time softer, almost reverent. The Iron Ghost has come. The cold, suffocating fog of Crimson Hollow curled tighter around the decrepit buildings as Mike Tyson moved deeper into the heart of the cursed district. The faint glow of the streetlights barely pierced the dense mist, casting elongated, distorted shadows that twisted and slithered along the cracked pavement. Each step Tyson took echoed through the alleyways, a steady, deliberate drumbeat in a place that had long forgotten the sound of courage. Rex exhaled a long, curling plume of smoke from his cigarette, the ember flaring bright in the mist. "Well, well," he muttered, his voice low and venomous. "The great Mike Tyson himself. I thought you were just a ghost story." Tyson's boots crunched against broken glass as he stepped into the square beneath the watchtower. He lifted his head, locking eyes with Rex. "I don't do ghost stories," he replied, his voice calm but edged with iron. The Night Reapers shifted, some chuckling, others gripping their weapons tighter. One of them, taller than the rest, with jagged scars down his exposed forearms, stepped forward and spat on the ground. "You've got guts walking in here alone, champ, but guts spill easy." Tyson didn't flinch. He studied the man, the way he held his blade, the tension in his shoulders. "You really think I came here to bleed?" Before the Reaper could respond, Tyson surged forward, his fist slamming into the man's gut with a force that sent him flying backward into a crumbling wall. The impact echoed like thunder, and the Reaper crumpled, gasping for air. The other Reapers hissed like feral animals, surrounding Tyson in an instant. Chains whipped through the air, blades gleamed, and the sound of heavy boots echoed as they lunged at him from all sides. But Tyson was already moving, his body a blur of raw, precise power. He ducked under a swinging chain, catching it midair and yanking the wielder off his feet. With a brutal twist, he sent the man crashing into two others, their skeletal masks cracking against the concrete. Another Reaper came at him from behind, swinging a spiked club. Tyson turned just in time, deflecting the blow with his forearm and countering with a swift, devastating uppercut that shattered the man's jaw beneath his mask. Blood splattered the fog like dark ink. But it wasn't just the Reapers Tyson had to fight. The hollow itself seemed to awaken with the chaos. The fog thickened, tendrils rising like spectral arms, reaching for Tyson's legs, trying to pull him down. Whispers grew louder, voices of the damned screaming warnings, curses and taunts. Shadows detached from the alley walls, flickering in and out of sight, as if the hollow wanted to join the fight. Tyson's breath quickened, but he centered himself, focusing on the enemies he could hit. He spun, dodged, and struck with relentless precision, each punch cracking bone and splitting flesh. But the Reapers kept coming, relentless in their assault, their movements growing more frenzied, more violent, as if the hollow was fueling their rage. From his perch above, Rex watched with a mixture of amusement and something darker: curiosity. Tyson was supposed to fall by now, another soul swallowed by the hollow. Yet here he was, carving through the Reapers like a force of nature. "Enough!" Rex's voice boomed, cutting through the fog like a blade. The remaining Reapers froze, panting heavily, bloodied and broken. Tyson, his chest rising and falling with exertion, lifted his head to the tower. Rex flicked his cigarette to the ground and jumped from the watchtower, landing heavily but gracefully on the cracked pavement. The fog recoiled from him as if even the cursed air feared its master. Rex straightened, his towering frame imposing, his scarred face twisted into a sneer. "You really think fists alone can beat this place? The hollow isn't just brick and fog. It's alive. It feeds on fear, on weakness. You're just meat here, Tyson." Tyson wiped the blood from his lip, his eyes never leaving Rex. "I've faced worse monsters than you. This place can't scare me." Rex's grin widened, revealing jagged teeth. "Then let's see how long that bravado lasts." With that, the ground beneath them rumbled, the fog swirling faster, rising into massive tendrils that lashed out like whips. Tyson tensed, preparing for the fight of his life, not just against a man corrupted by darkness, but against the very soul of Crimson Hollow itself. The ground trembled beneath Mike Tyson's feet, the cursed heart of Crimson Hollow coming alive in ways it hadn't for decades. The swirling fog twisted into monstrous tendrils, slithering through the alleyways like serpents hunting prey. The air thickened, heavy with the weight of centuries of fear and violence, as if the district itself was ready to consume Tyson whole. But Tyson stood firm. Opposite him, Rex Donovan's sneer twisted into something darker, something primal. The Hollow King no longer looked entirely human. His body seemed to pulse with the living fog, his veins coursing with the same dark energy that poisoned Crimson Hollow. His eyes glowed faintly in the mist, cold and predatory. "You think fists alone will get you through this?" Rex spat, the fog curling around his outstretched hands, forming jagged claws of smoke and shadow. "The Hollow isn't bound by rules. It's chaos, pure, beautiful chaos." As the dust settled and the flashing red and blue lights painted the alleyway, a heavy stillness hung in the air. Officer Jack Reynolds, now in handcuffs, was being led away by his fellow officers. His head bowed, his face swollen and bloodied from the brutal reckoning Mike Tyson had delivered. The once cocky and aggressive officer was now a shell of the man he had been just moments earlier. The smug arrogance that had fueled his abuse of power was gone, replaced by a mixture of shame, fear, and barely concealed rage. Mike Tyson stood a few feet away, his broad chest still heaving as adrenaline coursed through his veins. His fists were unclenched now, but the intensity in his eyes hadn't faded. He watched as Reynolds was shoved into the back of a police cruiser, the heavy metallic clunk of the door slamming shut, echoing through the alley like a final verdict. The crowd that had gathered remained eerily silent, many still holding their phones up, recording every moment as evidence of the injustice they had witnessed, and the justice that had been served. One officer, a younger man who had watched everything unfold, approached Mike cautiously. There was a mixture of awe and respect in his eyes as he spoke. "I saw the footage. You did what anyone would have done, maybe even more." His voice trailed off, understanding the magnitude of what had just happened. Mike nodded slightly, his eyes shifting to Lana, who stood beside him, her arm still sore from the brutal strike but her spirit unbroken. She was bruised, but she held her head high, a defiant glint in her eyes. The bond between father and daughter had been tested and strengthened through this ordeal. The crowd began to murmur softly, conversations flowing as people shared their thoughts on the events they had just witnessed. Many praised Mike for standing up against the abuse of power, while others were still in shock at how quickly things had escalated. But amidst the whispers, one older man, dressed in plain clothes, stepped forward. His voice, though low, carried weight as he said, "This is the kind of courage we need. Someone willing to stand up when no one else will." Mike glanced at him, then at Lana, feeling the weight of those words. He hadn't done it for praise, nor for attention. He had done it because no one had the right to harm his daughter. He had done it out of love and the primal instinct to protect. The officers began clearing the scene, but the energy in the alley remained charged. The truth of what had happened here wouldn't be forgotten. Videos would spread, stories would be told, and Officer Jack Reynolds would forever be remembered not as a man of the law, but as a symbol of its failure. And the power of a father's love to set things right. As the flashing sirens faded into the distance, taking the disgraced Officer Reynolds with them, a profound stillness settled over the alleyway. It was the kind of silence that follows a storm, heavy, reflective, and filled with the weight of what had just transpired. Mike Tyson turned to Lana, his intense expression softening as he took in the sight of his daughter. Her shoulder was bruised, and her face still carried traces of pain, but there was a fierce, unbroken strength in her eyes. He approached her carefully, the raw adrenaline still pulsing through his veins, but his focus was now solely on her. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, his deep voice trembling slightly with emotion. Lana hesitated, the events of the past hour racing through her mind. She felt the soreness in her arm where Reynolds had struck her. But more than that, she felt the overwhelming relief of safety. Her father had been there when she needed him most. She looked up at Mike and gave a small, reassuring smile. "Yeah, Dad," she replied softly. "I am now. Thanks to you." Mike let out a heavy breath, the tension in his chest finally starting to release. He reached out, wrapping his strong arms around her, pulling her into a tight, protective embrace. Lana sank into the hug, feeling the safety in his arms, the warmth, the love, and the sheer power of a father's devotion. For a moment, they stood there silently, father and daughter, the bond between them now stronger than ever. Mike pulled back slightly, placing a large, calloused hand gently on Lana's cheek. "No one lays a hand on my family and gets away with it," he said firmly, his eyes filled with both love and lingering fury. Lana's eyes glistened with tears that she had held back throughout the ordeal. She chuckled lightly through the emotion, wiping her face. "I know, Dad. You proved that today." The crowd that had lingered nearby began to disperse, but many still looked on, deeply moved by the scene. It wasn't just about the fight or the fall of a corrupt officer. It was about something deeper. It was about love, protection, and the strength that comes from standing up for what's right.